Hi, everyone. What an amazing start to the Maximum India Conclave we've had. We've had our IVCA chairperson speak to all of you regarding how we are focusing on getting the domestic and international pools of capital in this industry. And we had Mr. Uday Kotak convey his perspectives. We had the Honorable Finance Minister as well, and a very interesting panel on the infrastructure story and how it is panning out in the country. Now we'll be joined with Ms Leong, and she'll deliver a keynote on the CDPQ's climate strategy for us. Ms. Leong is responsible for the regional management of CDPQ Global in Asia Pacific. She's based in Singapore. She coordinates all CDPQ activities in the region and ensures optimal positioning and outreach. Ms. Leong has over 30 years of experience in finance and banking sector, and she has extensive business network in China and Southeast Asia, including Singapore. Now I would like to call upon stage Ms. Leong. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you
you
so
very
much for
much.
sharing your
Thank
perspectives
you.
with us. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be speaking at this event. And actually today it's with great pleasure that I'm going to share CDPQ's new climate strategy for 2021. So if we move on to the next page, please. Sorry, could we move on to the next page? Thank you. Thank you very much. So, I would like just to share a little bit in terms of the commitment that CDPQ has made way back in 2017. So 2017 was where we made our first climate strategy announcement. And we have since moved a long way. I would like to share what have we actually done. So just to recap, in 2017, CDPQ had 18 billion of green assets. And we made a commitment that we're going to reduce our carbon intensity by 25% in 2025. So those were the two biggest commitments that we made. And also in 2017, we started changing all of our variable compensation such that it is tied to all of our climate commitments. So I think this is really refreshing at that point in time in 2017. And even today, 2021, we remain one of the very few institutions that actually link our variable compensation with our climate statement. This is really how much we mean when it comes to ESG and climate. So I'm here to share with you the next stage. So if you move on to the next slide. That's right, the next stage. All right, so if we stay here, the 4 vital pillars, what we have just announced less than a week ago. What we have said is that if you recall the numbers, 2017, we had 18 billion worth of green assets. Our new commitment is that we're going to increase that to 54 billion by 2025. So that's 3 times that of 2017. And if you remember what I've said about the carbon intensity, we've made a commitment to reduce our carbon intensity by 25% in 2025. And in fact, we exceeded that as I speak. So as of 2020, we've already reduced our carbon intensity by 38%. And our new commitment is that we're going to reduce it even further, 60% by 2030. And we remain committed to be carbon neutral by 2050. Now, and the third thing that you see here on this particular slide, I think for a lot of us in this room, myself included, this is actually the most interesting part of it, that we are dedicated a $10 billion envelope to finance sectors that is going to transition from carbon intensive to a lot more green. So that 10 billion envelope is going to be applicable. We are going to invest in public, in private, in infrastructure, in private equity, in real estate. So it's going to cut across all of the asset classes that CDPQ invest in. So if I take a step back, for those of you who are not familiar with CDPQ, we are the second largest pension fund originating from Canada. And as I speak, our AUM, it's about 400 billion Canadian dollars. And we invest across several asset classes, including public equities, private equities, infrastructure, fixed income, and real estate. So when I say, we've got a $10 billion transition plan. And lastly, by the end of 2022, we have got 1% more of our assets that's still in oil. And we are going to exit completely by the end of 2022 because we don't believe that we're going to continue supporting the growth of oil supply by end of 2022. Can I move to the next slide? Thank you. So if you see what I've just highlighted, so as of now, as I speak, 2022, we've already achieved 36 billion of low carbon assets, and that's up from 18 billion. And as I said earlier, we've already achieved 38% reduction, and that's way exceeding our original target. And we are still very committed to the net zero by 2050. All right. So if we're going to the next slide, how are we going to get 54 billion in green assets? As I said, we are going to look at public. We are going to look at public and private space. And a lot of you may already know that we're very, very big in renewables. In fact, we're one of the world's largest. We're the third largest investor in renewable energy. So green assets will be really a key pillar of our investment strategy. If I go on to the next slide. All right, and 60% carbon reduction. So I think I've actually had a discussion with quite a lot of our peers, including other pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. So I think each of us take a slightly different approach. Some of us measure carbon output, some of us measure carbon intensity. And in our case, we actually measure carbon intensity and we outsource that measurement to external third party who validate, audit our numbers. So this is a number that we stand by and we are very much committed to reducing our carbon intensity by 60%. And as I said earlier, all of these climate strategy, it is closely linked to my personal variable compensation, and it is also applicable to all of my investment colleagues. Right. If I go to the next slide, thank you. So where are we now? And if I move on to the next slide, I think this is a repeat of what I've said earlier. If I move on to the very next slide, 10 billion. Now, if I can spend a little bit of time, what does a transition envelope mean? I think it's quite easy to understand, okay, you're going to invest in green buildings, you're going to invest in renewables. That's fairly easy to understand. But I think we've come to acknowledge that there are a lot of materials that we're currently using to produce the green products. But really, the whole production process itself is still very, very heavy in terms of carbon emission. So think about, for example, all of the raw materials that we use. So whether it's steel, metal, all of that manufacturing process is actually heavily carbon emitting. Same thing when we talk about cement, as an example. The building itself, the finished product, may be a green building. But all of the materials that go on to build the building itself, they are still very polluting. So that's why we're talking about investing in transition. Are there alternatives? Are there ways to produce cement in a more sustainable manner? Are there ways to produce steel, plastics, structural plastics in a more carbon-friendly manner? So all of these are food for thought, and we're willing to put our money to kind of back all of these new technology. Another thing that I think is very close to the heart of India is agriculture. So same thing, we talk about fertilizers. The production of fertilizers is actually, again, one of the highest carbon emitting materials. So again, are there alternatives? to how we produce fertilizers in order to create sustainability for food production. So all of that is going to be within that $10 billion envelope. And obviously, I think 10 billion in itself is not going to move the dial a lot. But 10 billion coming from a single organization. And what we're doing is that we're partnering with a lot of like-minded investors like ourselves. So CDPQ, we've actually co-founded two of such networks. So one of them is ILN, and the other one is obviously the UN Net Zero Alliance, amongst a lot of our peers and ourselves. So all of this, I think if we are able to put together public, private money, I think we will be able to make a difference. And the other question that we get asked a lot is that how do you, what will you invest in? Because obviously we're going to have a lot of fund managers who would come up to me and say that, look, we have got, green products, we have got green ideas, we have got sustainable financing. But the way we are going to do it for this $10 billion, we're actually going to have certification by external parties on an annual basis. So two of the ones that we're using is actually what we call science-based targets, STI. And the second one is Climate Bond Initiative, CBI. So we are going to rely on external certification in order to ensure that the 10 billion that we're putting in place will be going to the right sectors, the right companies, and the right partners. So I hope, I've clarified in terms of where we are. Clearly, it's still going to be a learning process for us as we go along because the world is evolving. But I think the key message is that climate is really urgent, and we are trying to do our best to play our part. And because we do believe that time is of the essence here. And so that explains why we're starting with a $10 billion envelope. Now, if I can move on to the next slide. Now, so the last commitment that we're making with our new climate strategy is that by end 2022, we are going to exit all of the oil as well as the gas pipes. So I think for those of you who understand Canada a little bit, or who have a bit of knowledge for Canada, you know that gas pipes is a very big industry in Canada. So I think it took a lot for us to be saying that, look, we are going to exit from this because we believe that today, as we speak, there are now alternatives to oil to power the world. So this is where we are going to back the new technology to help us transition. So I think this, very much wrap up the CDPQ new climate strategy, and I'm happy to take any questions or, for discussions. Thank you.
Oh, that was a very insightful session, Ms. Leong. Really, really happy to understand that such a large investor is committing so thoroughly to climate change. And as you rightly said, climate change is inflection point.
Correct.
And it's so good to know that deep dive into sectors and understanding from a cement production point of view, or from a gas pipeline point of view, or from a agriculture point of view as well, how nuances of each and every process affect carbon emissions, and how deep dive CDPQ does in terms of this climate strategy to thoroughly check where they're investing. And I also like the point that since it is also linked to the compensation, there is no going the wrong way, and you will invest in the right strategy. So really thank you for such insights, and thank you for sharing the climate strategy with us. We'll just check whether there are any questions that the audience would want to ask.
Sure.
So just give us a few seconds. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So we have a few questions. One, should I go ahead and read the first one?
Sure. Go ahead.
So someone writes, I think Dr. Ruchi Dana, she writes, China is shutting down voluntarily due to the environment, temporarily because of Olympics, and forced due to power cuts. They've gone down 1,000 chem parks to 450 and probably less. Do you think Indian chemical industry, sixth largest in the world, is ready to take up the reduction?
Is this a is this a competition between China and India?
Oh, yeah.
I think the China, and it's not just China. If you are looking at even UK, we're experiencing power shortages. And in fact, I think we're now heading towards the winter season, where the test will come. And I think the world is probably going to be doing quite a tight balancing act as we try to kind of wean ourselves away from coal,
Yeah.
or what we call dirty energy, and
Yes.
transition. But transition doesn't happen overnight either. Um, so basically, you still need to feed your population. You still need to provide jobs, and those are the realities of life. So where do we go, taking into consideration that we need to move fast, and yet there will be consequences.
Oh, yes.
So I think it'll be very interesting to look at the China example to say that, look, how far can they stretch this? That yes, you are going to have a lot of fairly unhappy. Just to give an example, one of the very immediate effects is that the Chinese factories have benefited tremendously from COVID,
Yeah.
because as a lot of factories globally shut, so what will happen in naturally is that you will fulfill the ones with the highest margins,
Yes.
and your most strategic partners, and then you kind of have to forego the rest because these are choices. Um, so it's not easy, but I think personally, I think China will be able to manage, slowly and gradually, because I think this is one of the things when you have a managed economy.
Yeah.
I think it can happen.
So it's a matter of prioritizing.
It's, maybe I'm oversimplifying things, but I
Sure.
think prioritizing is definitely one of them, and the political willpower,
Oh, yes.
um, is clearly, it's also very important because, as I said, there will be human costs related to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether you go green or you go brown, you will still have human costs involved.
Yeah.
And I think the political willpower to try to kind of balance the two, um, is challenging, is tough. Um, so coming back to institutional investors like CDPQ. So what we are trying to do is that we are not just working on our own. We are working with like-minded investors, global investors, of our size, equally big, equally, I would say, influential.
Yeah.
And I think we believe that if all of us come together,
Yeah.
and so because it cannot be just left to the government, to the
Yeah.
public.
Yeah.
So the private sector has to come in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. So I think with that, I would just like to thank you. Great insights, and now we know if CDPQ were to invest, what would be the sector, what would be the strategy, and there'll be heavy stress on climate change and carbon emissions. So
Correct.
thank you so much for your time. With that, we
Thank
can
you.
close the session. Thanks. Thank you
Thank you
so much.
very much. Thank you.